everyone, welcome to We Are Wavemakers podcast season 2. And my name is Nazira.
And I'm Rachel.
And boy, do I have a confession for this season.
Okay, what are you confessing today?
So, we've been doing a lot of research about content marketing because that's what season 2 is all about. And I have been really obsessed with reading Medium. Yeah, I know it's crazy. I'm just like so obsessed that I max my articles. Did you know that you can only read 5 articles in one time?
Yeah, on the free version, right?
It sucks. So I felt really sad and almost annoyed, and I decided that I would justify for our team. Um, to invest in the paid version. And so I see it as a way of educating the self. And for me, that works because now the whole team can read Medium as much as they want, and so can I.
Right.
Yeah.
I love how you justified that for the rest
Oh,
of the
yeah,
team.
I'm so good at justifying
and then
things.
just like spent on it
Yeah.
for all of us.
Yeah, it's only $5 a month.
Yes. Okay.
There's a term for that, isn't it?
Yeah, Naz, actually, interestingly, I think that's what we call cognitive dissonance.
Right.
And it's basically that gap between what you think is right and how you act, right? So it's basically how it drives your action, and it's based on this thought, belief, and value that you set up for yourself that you feel is morally correct. And that's how you made that decision.
Is it exactly like how that time Zalora emailed me about my wish list and that it's on sale and that I should buy it now?
Yeah.
Is that similar to what happened? And
what did Zalora say to you?
Well, I had this thing that was on my wish list, and then they sent me this email and said, you need to buy now because this product is 50% off. Thankfully, I didn't have enough cash in my bank account at that time, so I didn't buy it. But I feel guilty and I still think about it.
Okay.
Is that cognitive dissonance too?
Absolutely. So,
oh, God.
As humans, we're naturally built with like contradictory beliefs, values, as I said, and these ideas are actually a way for brands these days to sort of like drive adapted action,
Right.
AKA it just justifies the way we do things. And so I'm very excited for today's topic because we have an expert on the matter.
Oh.
And interestingly, we read her article on Medium.
Yes, we did.
And it's basically about using cognitive dissonance between bigger brands and how they use it in their marketing mix. And so I would like to introduce a very special guest all the way from California. Am I right, California? Right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right. We have Jasmine Bina with us today. It's in the morning over there and we're in Bali time. It's late at night, but it's all good because today's topic is important. I think she is basically going to give us a little bit more insight into the world of cognitive dissonance.
Right.
And so I won't introduce her. Jasmine, maybe you could give us a little bit of introduction to yourself and tell us about what you do, and then we'll get into the questions.
Yeah, sure. So, I'm Jasmine Bina. I'm the founder of Concept Bureau. We're a brand strategy agency here in LA, and we've been around for a while. We started about 10 years ago. At that time, we were more of a PR agency. So we worked with a lot of tech startups, a lot of companies in Silicon Valley and on the East Coast. And then as we grew, we realized that brand strategy was really more of a required offering for the companies that we were trying to serve. And that's around the time that I started publishing. So that's when my Medium articles started. I wanted to explore what we felt brand strategy was, especially since so much was changing in every market. Barriers to entry disappearing, so many new entrants, money flowing freely at times. So all kinds of new startups cropping up, and really like our cultural stories changing, primarily in the US. So I work with companies pretty much across all industries, me and my partner. And I would say if we have a specialty, it's that we've focused most of our research over the last 10 years on the post-boomer audience. So anybody that's probably 40, 45 years and younger, those are the people that we've researched. And, we came across the concept of cognitive dissonance and researched it and put our own interpretation on it because we were seeing this with a lot of our customers, users over time, that there was something going on here psychologically that we wanted to dig into. And that's how we kind of explored the topic more.
That's amazing. I must say, like we applaud your article. Like there's so much depth into your research, and particularly loved like the framework that you've created into like helping us understand how this thought process works. So, what made your agency explore the psychology behind these markets?
Well, like I said, we were coming across a lot of clients when we were doing user interviews and doing research into their user bases. So far, up until this point, traditionally, when you looking at a demographic or looking at your users, people are looking at pain point. They're looking at what do people want, what do they need, what are they missing in their lives, how can we remove friction. But we saw that a lot of times that doesn't explain why people make the choices that they make. They may explain their choices logically, but clearly that wasn't the driver for their choices. And the science backs that up too. Let me be clear. All decisions are emotional. And I know that sounds like hyperbole, but if you look at some of the studies that were done, there was one by a researcher named Antonio Damasio a few years back. He spoke with patients that had full control of their logical faculties, but the emotional processing center of their brains had been damaged. So they were unable to actually feel emotions. And interestingly, these people couldn't make decisions. And that didn't make sense. If your emotional piece is missing, you still have your logical piece. You should be able to make decisions. The theory goes you can use logic to get very, very close to a decision, but ultimately, without perfect information, you have to use an emotional trigger to make that final choice. So if we're dealing with customers that make every decision emotionally, why are we looking at things so logically? Why are we looking at pain point frameworks? So that was the premise, and that's why we decided to really look at the psychology. Most of the work that we do is about the psychology, not just of the user, but of the market, of the customer, cultural trends. All these things definitely have very pragmatic and practical and scientific mechanics happening. But what's really interesting and that you can play with as a brand strategy is the emotional side.
And have brands, are they captivated by your, method of approach thus far? Using psychology as a way to tap into the market's needs and pain points.
Yeah, so far it's worked really well. I do get a lot of feedback from our customers that we really approach brand strategy very differently. So we typically have, not to bore you with our process, but we typically have two parts to our strategies. The first part is a very, very deep research and discovery piece. And we've developed our own frameworks, many of which I've published on Medium and in other places. That help us kind of interrogate what are the secret biases, the beliefs, the unspoken stories. What are people willing to pay a premium for? I'm sure you see this in Bali, but we see this in the US 100%. People aren't just buying products anymore, they're buying stories. The fact that now we have premium toothpastes, like special toothpaste that you can buy online, a version for daytime, a version for nighttime, special ingredients. I don't know that any of those things are functionally meaningful, but the story behind it is what people are paying an extra premium for. And so, when we are able to decode what it is that people are actually looking for and what they actually want to buy, it does create a very effective brand strategy. And I think that's the part that is hard for people to square sometimes, but when they work with us, they get it. There is a science to the emotional side. It's not just creating something out of thin air. The creativity piece comes later when you actually build the brand and decide how to create messages that work around those triggers. But there is a way to tie your decisions as a brand and your strategy back to actual research and insights and findings that talk about the secret inner world that your customers have.
That's amazing. And so, like, what kind of data do you look into, like, in order to tap into the cognitive dissonance of a specific market?
So we have different frameworks. My partner, actually, his background is aerospace engineering, so everything is a framework for him. He brought a lot of structure to our
That
work
is
when he
science.
joined. Yeah, yeah. So one of the frameworks is we really look at trend data. And I don't like to buy trend reports. I feel like the trend reports that are on the market right now don't really go deep enough. And a lot of times, if you just ask people what they want, or if you see what they've been doing up until this point, you're just going to get information about where the world is at right now. If you want to create a brand, you need to know where the world is going. We like to look in a 3 to 5 year horizon. So how do you do that? Well, one of our frameworks it's called the emergent story arc. I've definitely published this on Medium. We use it in all of our engagements. And I like to look at the last 2 or 3 generations of culture and look at the stories that touch our customers. So let's say we have a client, like a beauty client. I would look at the stories around femininity and female identity, wellness, how one presents themselves, the female role in society, makeup itself. And I would look at those different stories and ask myself, okay, how have these evolved over time? And that's actual research. We go and dig through articles and reports. We look at where private spending went, where investments went, where government spending went. We look for all kinds of signals in the market when it comes to media or entertainment or content, definitely what people were doing over different time periods. And if you can map where these stories were 2 or 3 generations ago and connect the dots to where they are today, you're going to get a trajectory. And then from there, you can kind of estimate where you think those stories are going in the future. That's one really big thing that helps us figure out, the kind of data that we need to figure out where the cognitive dissonance is. We also definitely do user interviews. This is, I think, the heaviest piece of the work that we do. Some customers don't need it if they're pre-launch. And I do believe that user interviews are not about asking people what they want because they don't know what they want yet. We haven't shown them what they can have. What you need to ask people is questions that reveal what beliefs they're operating on in the world, because those are the beliefs that you can start to change. If we're still going with the same beauty analogy, I would ask people about questions like, what are the other brands that you already buy in any part of your life? So let's say they go to a really expensive supermarket, but they won't spend money on their car. That's a really, really shallow finding, but you can, with other information, infer that they have a strong belief in wellness and investing in what goes into their bodies, but they don't really care about any kind of outward indicators of possessions or wealth. And from there, you can start to figure out, okay, if that's the case, can we connect beauty to internal health? I mean, I'm making wild connections here, but there are ways where you can kind of figure out what the triggers are, and work with them to create a new story in the space that people can actually pay for. But you'll see that if I ask someone, are you looking for a wellness beauty brand? They're not going to say yes because they don't know that. That's why you have to kind of uncover the way that they think.
Right. So you're sort of like analyzing their feedback from a different perspective, but you're not asking
exactly
them like direct questions. You're like hypothetical, and then you make sense of their feedback in time. That's amazing.
Do you use do you find a data correlation between different cultures across the board? Because you're primarily working with the U.S. market, right? And you've got the Latinos, you've got the the Asians, and there's so many, like it's so diverse in the U.S. How does that data? How do you even dissect that data? And
it's a really good question. It's a really good question. I will tell you, over time, we've noticed that demographics and backgrounds have become less and less important. They kind of really don't mean anything anymore because we kind of share mentalities across age or race or socioeconomic background or where you live. A good example of this is when we work with parenting brands once in a while, which is a really interesting space because there's so much emotion there. And when we're looking at moms and their children, we realize a lot of times, if you look at adolescents, they share the same mindsets as their parents, not because they're more mature, but because parents are just younger now, right? They're more open-minded. Their generation has literally changed over time. So what we like to look at instead of, okay, what do these people look like, is how do they think? So we create psychographic profiles, and you can generally take any population for a company and trim it down to 2 or 3 psychographics. And psychographics means for us, how do these people relate to the story that we're telling? Not do they buy our toothpaste? It's more like, 3 different relationships to what oral care means for these people or self-care means to these people. When you do that, when you break down how people think and how they relate to these things, you'll start to see some patterns. And I feel like our job mostly on the research side is to be pattern finders. We're looking for patterns in the market, patterns in cultures over time. We're also looking for patterns between psychographics. So yes, you can have people with 3 very different relationships with their oral care or their self-care or wellness or whatever, but there will be some resonant themes that you'll find among all of them. And it's always there. You just have to keep digging until you find it. So that's how we deal with that. It's never a deterrent. Sometimes psychographics will correlate with age or gender, but rarely more than that. Really going by mentality is a much better indicator of who you're talking to and how you can create a space that will get them to behave differently and prefer your product over others.
Okay, so do you think it's crucial then for brands to work towards applying this theory to grow? And I'm just talking more for startups or small businesses, especially when they want to scale their brand and they are, curious about cognitive dissonance and how can they apply this theory. Your article was very much driven towards bigger brands, which makes sense, like in the likes of having budget and capacity and like research and everything. But say if like a smaller or medium business were to like want to use this theory,
where do they begin?
Yeah, how does it work? you know?
First of all, you don't have to necessarily address a cognitive dissonance if it's not there. So if it's not broken, you don't have to go fix it. But if you are a smaller to medium-sized company, I would say the first way to approach this is, one, you have to change your own mindset. If you know that there is a gap between the way people think and the way they behave, you have to come at it non-judgmentally. We work with, and I've seen founders that can judge that gap with their customers. If you don't have empathy with your customer, like full empathy, you're going to miss something important because they're going to tell you somehow, one way or another, they'll signal it to you, and then you're going to miss it because you're not paying attention. But, start with yourself. So you're the first customer of your product or your service. So ask yourself, be really, really honest. Do I have a cognitive dissonance here? A lot of times, if we're working with a client in the very, very beginning, or if they're pitching us and we're trying to see if there's a good fit and we're going to work together, um, if I'm a user of their product, which I am more often than not, I start to interrogate myself and say, do I have a cognitive dissonance here? Do I have, a belief system that I contradict in my actions? Is there a discomfort that I feel because I am not being who I think I am? That can give you a lot of clues immediately. And then, you don't need huge budgets. You can still look in the same 2 places that we look. You can still conduct interviews and ask the right kinds of questions so that you're revealing people's beliefs and motivators that they're not necessarily talking about, or that they don't necessarily demonstrate when they're purchasing a product like yours. But you need to also pay attention to the market. The biggest thing I say about this is, you have to constantly be reading about what is happening in your space and outside of your space, because more and more, nobody's playing in one category anymore. Tesla, are they really just an automaker? Are beauty brands like the ones you see in Sephora, are they really just playing in beauty anymore? People are transcending different categories and different verticals because that's where customers find value. So look at those things, pay attention, become an information junkie. And then the hardest part for people, which I think really separates brand strategists from people that are just, really good marketers or know how to make a brand that feels good, but not necessarily a brand that's strategically defensible, is that you have to have an opinion. You can't just know what's going to happen or what is happening. You have to have an opinion on why it's happening and where the future of the space should go. In that opinion is where you can really create a brand that addresses what cognitive dissonance is. If you look at the examples that were in that article, and if you go through each one, you'll see each one of those brands has a very strong opinion about the future, about their customers, about the way we should be in this world, about the brand's role in the world and where it's going and how they're trying to make that vision a reality. And that's not, you can do it yourself. Any small to medium-sized company should do that. And frankly, that makes you a better leader anyways. If you have a clear idea and a strong, and when I say opinion, by the way, I don't mean like an opinion everyone can agree with. It has to be an opinion that divides people. It has to be an opinion that creates tension. That's where the best brands are created, is in that uncomfortable space. So yeah, it nobody's precluded from doing this.
Yep. That's powerful. Start with the self.
Cool. And I think we really wanted to also try to understand the metrics side of the what makes it successful. Like, what are the metrics to say I've done it?
Right. So, sure, it's great when you've solved a pain point and you can say we've fixed this problem for our users. They feel less friction here. But the real question is, have we changed the conversation? If you change the conversation around a space, like if you make toothpaste not about brushing your teeth, but about like I don't know, living your best life or um, tapping into a truer version of yourself or whatever, whatever that grandiose conversation is, that is when you've addressed cognitive dissonance and you've carved out a new space that your brand can play in, that a regular toothpaste brand can no longer play in anymore. That's what defensibility is. I think that's one of the greatest measures. So, when we work with companies, they ask us I've been getting this question more and more lately, like, what kind of companies should work with you? And I tell people, companies that really want to create a new narrative, that are really looking to change a space, that are willing to take a risk. And you got to do some soul searching before you do that, because people think they want to do that, but more often than not, they don't actually, because there's a lot of uncertainty involved.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable.
Right. But if you have an appetite for that, then I think that's a great metric. If you can say, this conversation didn't exist before our brand came into the space, then you have solved a cognitive dissonance problem. So another way of looking at it is, do people see us as a company in a separate category from our direct competitors? There's a great brand out here called Four Sigmatic, and they create coffee, and it's really just kind of enriched coffee with ingredients that make you more alert or are good for your skin or whatever. But people don't call Four Sigmatic coffee. They call Four Sigmatic Four Sigmatic. And it's because that company has started a very different conversation on what your morning ritual is. It's not a conversation about your coffee. It's a conversation about how you start your day, what this very personal, intimate ritual that you conduct for yourself should be about every day. And that's interesting. And the conversation, it's not just the conversation you're having. It's, you can talk to an audience of nobody and find the conversation has changed, but nobody's listening. That conversation has to show up in the media. Your customers have to be repeating it. Your competitors should even be talking about it, because you've forced them to have to address it. Those are really good
metrics,
signs that you actually have. Yeah, those are great metrics for seeing if you have actually done what you meant to do with the cognitive dissonance problem.
I think, like, to wrap it up, I'd like to just get your thoughts on, we're in a very woke era, I feel, in our generation. And you mentioned earlier about how you're looking into data from the generations before us. And I'd like to understand, how do you see the changes of our generation coming forward? We're going into 2020, and like, what do you see the differences of the generations of the past and how we're more woke, and how would cognitive dissonance come into play when brands want to converse with their target audience?
I'll start by saying that's a very loaded question. It's very big. There's not one answer to that. But I think, this goes back to empathy. It's easy to say that we're very woke, but I think every generation has had their big awakening, right? And every generation, if you look in the past, has also had their big disappointment after that awakening. I know in the US, you had kind of the whole hippie free love generation, but then they became the yuppies, right? Then they started founding companies and they became the CEOs. And you can look at that for every generation previous. So, this generation, I think, is very beautiful in its own way, has had its own grand awakening. And you can definitely say perhaps it's of a greater magnitude than any awakening that's happened before. But if we don't change the rules of society to meet those new expectations, we're going to have the same big disappointments that every generation has had before us. And brands have become such an integral part of the fabric of culture at this point. Your role as a company is to ask yourself, okay, how do I make this wokeness or this new ideal more of a reality for people? And, it has to be authentic. It might be a bit harder for, there's a great meme out there, or a great tweet that I posted a while ago of somebody took a picture of a dentist's office, and it said, find the fire that drives you and make it a reality. Like, and that's a bit too much of a you're at your dentist's office, you want to get your teeth fixed. You don't want to have like a, like a meaning of life moment. But that's not to say that a dental brand can't get there, but you just can't skip too many steps. So, I would say when it comes to the theory of cognitive dissonance, ask yourself, what is the role that you can play? True, you're solving cognitive dissonance for the product problem, but there's always an opportunity to solve it on a cultural level too. Just find out though where your cultural piece is. For a dentist office, it's maybe not about finding your dreams, but instead more about taking care of the temple that is your body or something like that. That's a bit more tethered to who you actually are authentically.
Yeah.
Right?
That's still quite woke. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that really answers our question. I mean, because you're right, it's such a deep question. And I think that's why we loved your article as well, where as an agency where we love to dig deeper into how, people think. And it's something that definitely isn't really happening in this part of the world. And hence why we wanted your insights all the way in California.
I love it. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So thank you, Jasmine, for getting up to get on this call with us.
Wonderful.
It's been amazing.
Wonderful. I'm so happy. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
That was amazing. I'm so excited that we got to speak to Jasmine. What did you think, Nas?
Wow. I mean, we always talk about how we want to know the psychology behind brands choosing the things that they choose, from colors to fonts to campaign choices and key messaging, as we're always talking to clients and we're trying to understand that. And it's such a refreshing take to hear someone use science and methodologies to put it into a perspective that in the end, you got to reflect on yourself as well as use this method to basically understand your market.
And I love how one of her metrics was basically, again, looking back into the audience and the kind of conversations that comes out from whatever a brand does through these narratives. And I love that part of the thing that she measures is what's being said about a brand or a product or a service. What did you think about that?
I do love that too, because for me, her metrics of change, how she says that it's a success if it changes the narrative, and that if other brands start talking about that narrative, that's success, right? And I start to think about brands that have done that, and I really start to realize that without that, we would never evolve as a generation, and therefore her perspective makes it clear that we constantly are evolving as human beings, as generations. Like how she mentioned in the 70s, it was all about the hippie era. And then they evolved into the 80s where it was all about yuppies. And then now we're in this whole woke era of, I don't know, everything is about cultural appropriation, right? And so how are brands tapping into that cognitive dissonance, you know? And how are they using it is what I want to know. And again, it goes back to her question, you could disappoint the generations moving forward, or we can rise above it. And she is right that, we are living in an era where technology and communications is at a level that's, never been in our previous generations. And that being said, it may shift, and the cognitive dissonance that comes from it, I want to say it's a lot more woke, but I want to also say not woke, but people are more aware, self-aware, and that changes everything.
Definitely. And that's why she's always saying it is our responsibility to know information and to be informed in order for us to understand how brands are effective, our cognitive dissonance.
And so that goes back to our whole content marketing, topic for this entire season. I just want to say really quickly, when it comes to content, it's really important that when we do create content, we create with purpose and thinking about the pain points of what people really want to know, and we're living in an era where tech is available. Things like social listening, keyword research, I can know what's trending on Google through all this research, you know what I mean? And applying, say, what kind of methodology that Jasmine had, I can actually already start creating anomalies of what I believe makes sense to what the market is saying. So the reality is when she mentioned small to medium enterprises, she said, you can do this yourself. And stuff like what I just mentioned, all these trends and social listening tools, totally can do the same thing.
It's totally accessible for anyone and everyone if it's relevant to you. And that being said, I'm really excited for us to dive deeper into this content marketing world and to see like how, from a psychology perspective, it is a huge responsibility as a marketer to like create content for people and how it drives actions. So what's on our next episode, Nas?
So the next episode is going to be even more exciting because we're going to talk about how to use data to drive your content strategy. Kind of goes in line with what I was talking about, using social listening maybe, or other tools that are out there. We'll be speaking to an expert who actually understands how to dissect data and actually drive your content towards being a successful piece of content. I'm super excited as well. I just love this entire season. It's all about content. Content's fun.
I love content. And
so
with that, it's time for us to sign off. If you have any feedback on today's topic, please leave us a comment. We're on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, whatever channels out there, we're there. My name is Rachel.
And this is Nazira. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, and we will see you in the next episode. This is We Are Wavemakers, recording live to you from the Island of Gods, Bali.